Ladies and gentlemen, maybe a few comments or maybe one comment. I'm a sociologist, and sociologists have the reputation to be not very practical. And that is why my speech might be a little unpractical. I'd like to start with two stories now. 2 weeks ago, approximately, I saw an interesting experiment on TV. A show that was about notebooks and securing notebooks against theft. Placed an expensive notebook in a toilet beside the washing lavatory, and then they asked people what they would think, how many of those 70 guests going to the restrooms at that time would take the notebook. The person asked estimated the number to 25 approximately. You might ask yourselves what you would have estimated. In reality, however, the people were very surprised as to the outcome, because most people were not interested. Some people took the notebook and gave it to the bartender. Stolen, it would have never been, not by a single person of those 70 people. Another story takes place during the World Soccer Championship in 2006. In Stuttgart, there was a luggage found at the TV tower. People passing by tried to find the owner, and then they found a Spanish guy on the tower, and he was asked why he left the luggage there, and he was like, I thought Germany was a safe country with hardly any crime. And that was the image campaign of the Ministry of the Interior as to the soccer championship. And they frequently tell people that we are one of the safest countries of Europe and maybe even the world. Mr. Seehofer chose the same wording for this Congress. We calculate with crime. This is just a given thing automatically. If someone is damaged, the first thing that he's asked is whether people did enough to prevent such damage. In that sense, during the Congress, my Dutch colleague asked me whether the room was being locked down during the break. And he was asked whether he would be afraid of crime. But he said, well, I'm not stupid. Crime is part of everyday life, unfortunately, and determines behavior in public as well as social connections, social relations, maybe even feel insecurity. But even more common, it's just a fact. The possibility of becoming a victim of crime and prevention have turned into a normal routine that people don't even realize as such routine in everyday life, and frequently it's only visible if, just like in those two stories, the expectations are not being met. Crime and the connected thought of prevention regulate and structure the social order, politics, culture, and so on. Crime has turned into a crucial aspect of individual orientation. And this seems to be something new, after all. Sometimes people even talk about a decade change. You need to get orientation, and people are changing the social order. The sociological diagnosis of the last 2 decades that are even being written about might be even similar, even though different reasons are being named. The societies has become more and more unsafe. Traditional relations, social relations are becoming more unstable. Possible lifestyles and orientation are more varied, and generally accepted rules are being less and less important. The risks of individual life design are increasing. The social order and finally even democracy are being threatened. Crime and insecurity are are understood as an automatic consequence of modernization. This difference and this change has been named since the 80s with the keywords risk society. And it's a dominant crisis of disintegration and anomaly of postmodern society. The single dimensions that I chose as examples from Mr. Weidmeyer's integration approach are connected in some way and intensify each other. Mr. Weidmeyer sums it all up with the phrase, the more freedom, the less balance. The less balance, the more competence. The more competition, the more competition, the less solidarity. The less solidarity, the more single people. The more single people, the less social integration and ruthlessness. Of course, this is a very simplified version of the facts, and the idea of Mr. Weidmeyer has been proven empirically as to racism or ethical conflicts to explain such conflicts. But what I would like to point out when displaying this example as to a sociological analysis is the following. Disintegration is specifically used for explanation of increasing willingness to commit crimes and violence. And the following quotation of Mr. Weidmeyer after his long-term study as to groups of people is individualization, pluralization, flexibilization, and acceleration of social concepts of various ideas mean that individuals in postmodern societies are facing new and increased challenges, understood as development and modernization process. These diagnoses are going towards increasing insecurity, and this is where the different approaches do not differ from each other. This classic idea of general insecurity might even be understood in two senses. At one side, increase of threats, instability of participation and social integration, that, of course, the various groups of people are affected by at different degrees. And at the other side, insecurity might even mean sensitivity as to potential threats and risks of life design. The awareness of potential risks is increased, and therewith the opportunity of facing and interpreting ordinary threats as such threats. And this scandalism is also being increased. Security and insecurity therewith become central points of orientation, and prevention becomes the central term connected with this diagnosis. You could easily now say that all this is not at all new. Where's the huge change here towards a security society? Actually, the actual threats in all areas were much higher and larger in the past. The threat of crime was discussed in the past as well, and unemployment, poverty, that's not a new invention of the end of the 20th century. And the wide social security system only developed after the Second World War. The reference of these analyses is actually not the 19th century, but the 1960s and 70s. And for this area, we deal with economic wonder, complete employment, increase of employment educational systems, but at the same time, increasing numbers of crimes and the industrialization. Just to name a few terms of the developments. The 90s, with hindsight, seemed to be a very special decade of crises, culminating various risks, and the public awareness influenced politics, increasing unemployment, and for the first time, youth unemployment and the situation in the training market were clearly visible suddenly. And on top of that, the threatened competitiveness of Germany was being addressed, and how to finance the welfare state was addressed in public, and reformations of social security was implemented. Street crime and drug crimes, public drug trade in the cities became a crucial topic in the public. These crises are visible in the increasing numbers of fear of crime. Fear of crime was decreasing, but at the end of the 80s, it increased significantly and became a new and crucial point of orientation for the local and national politics. So it's not a coincidence that crime prevention developed during this time as a main goal of politics and tool of politics. And at all locations, the municipal crime prevention councils were established. There are similar developments visible in other countries, but already in the 70s and 80s, Germany was a little late here. The reasons of most diagnosis of societies assumes that the development of the structures is being visible in spreading of general insecurity. And this also directly affects the development of fear of crime, the general insecurity in society, and the media and social labeling of reasons and guilty people that the crime issue is being directed at. Discussing the threat of crime is being perceived as directing things towards other issues. It's just a factor of social insecurity. In social research, it has been proven over and over again, and it is an established view that the extent of fear of crime and the threat of crime has hardly anything to do with the development of crime itself, and may therefore also not be explained by crime. But the social crises are not very of diagnosis are not convincing. Therefore, because the fear of crime cannot be proven empirically, because the fear of crime is going down significantly for a few years, as you can see here. And therewith, I come back to my Spanish guy in Stuttgart, because the development of fear of crime, Germany has been showing since the soccer championship, World Soccer Championship, but not due to the soccer championship, a decrease of that. Crime and fear of crime are not things that people worry about anymore, but France and Belgium, the Netherlands, Great Britain and Spain, the fear of crime significantly increased. The connections between social and general insecurity at the one side and perception of threat at the other side seem to be a lot more complex. And this is also true for the diagnosis of the crises. Disintegration would be an example of that. Actually, on this basis, you should expect that the increasing modernization, individualization, and therewith disintegration would increase, and therewith the level of violence, as the quotation of Mr. Heidmeier states. However, this is not true for Germany and not even for the States. The opposite is true. For a few years, violence is partly significantly declining. The hypothesis that modernization automatically means disintegration and therewith crime and fear of crime increasing is obviously not to be reasoned with for that. In the international comparison, the development of France, the Netherlands, and Portugal point towards interesting aspects. In France and also in the Netherlands, the political constellations were established with right-wing parties having a heavy potential weight in politics. The majorities of those parties are threatening the middle-placed parties. In these two countries, inner security was labeled an explicit political goal. And the consequence was, in both countries, France and the Netherlands, enlargement of crime, punishment for crime. But this did not lead to a reduced perception of threat of crime, but led to increasing fear of crime. And at the other side, very different, Portugal, in the middle of the 90s, it still had the highest number of imprisoned persons, had a radical decriminalization of the drug area. The number of imprisoned persons was reduced by 1/3 to the level of Germany. And at the same time, the crime rate has been pretty stable, pretty equal. The connection between the meaning of crime and fear of crime in the population at the one side and the political development at the other side is being interpreted the other way around, actually. Not a certain way of politics is supposed to change the fear of crime, but the spreading of fear of crime is supposed to influence politics by making the political parties addressing the issues of the citizens and converting those issues into political measurements. For example, for Great Britain and the United States, the thesis was developed that increasing crime rates since the 60s, the threat of crime became also an issue for the middle groups of the society, especially these stories and rehabilitation of imprisoned people. And these people in the middle group of the society demanded stronger punishment. And the prisons and punishment situations were being critically viewed. During this process, the punishment measurements became more and more, and everything became more difficult therewith. To put it in a simple way, increasing crime rates leads to increasing threat by crime and increasing fear of crime, thus leading to punitive attitudes toward the situation of the people, and in the end, to repressive crime politics. An alternative would be to assume that the threat by crime and the fear of crime might be produced by politics in order to use it as tools for the elections. Political campaigns based on surveys, first of all in the States of the 60s, internal security became a topic, a hot issue during the election debates. And prior to that, it was a topic of experts, maybe, and social work issues. But since that time, it's being spread within public and being discussed in public. So other parties can't really argue against this political way. And the parties try to supersede each other who would be tougher on crime. This political strategy was also spread across Great Britain towards Europe. Who doesn't remember the Shield Party, that gained almost 20%? But in Germany, this doesn't, at least it doesn't seem to be automatically. Roland Koch, Mr. Koch, lost his absolute majority in Hesse in 2008 with that strategy. And the institutional prerequisites are quite different than in the States. We have public prosecutors and police officers are being elected, and the judges too. And they're very important. The independence of professional justice systems seems to be a limitation for too much crime, political populism. And there's a third way of explaining the connection between threat and fear of crime. The basic idea assumes that since the 70s, the conditions of the economic competition in the market have radically changed globalization, and the connected moving and shifting of capital leads to international competence as to locations dealing with laws, protective laws, taxes, and assets, therewith becoming central orientation points of the economy. Therewith, more liberal strategies are being implemented, leading to more spending more money of the governments. And the employees are also affected. And this comes along with increasing imbalance, social imbalance. You have governmental security being affected too, and it's the central reference point of social order. All these perspectives do have a certain degree of plausibility, but actually it shows that crime, the perception of crime, is also a matter of imagination. But usually the lower society people are being the ones being more likely to commit crimes, even though empirical research usually gets to the result that there's not a direct connection between the society and crime, but it's actually the local concentration of poverty and imbalance, injustice being the reasons for crime and violence. And both things might even be issues in politics. However, crime rates are declining also in the States, despite all increasing social imbalance, and despite also in comparison to Europe, it might be just not so much, but this reduction of crime is still happening. So the empirical research for direct connection between public and governmental security and the development of crime is not really very efficient. But in the international comparison, a welfare state orientation of politics comes along with a low rate of fear of crime and the high degree of trust in the political system. This is especially true for Scandinavia, where a high level of governmental security is connected with a low crime rate, and the rate of imprisonment are astonishingly low despite political changes. The thesis of the loss of socializing measurements and the increasing punitive attitudes might be mentioned for Germany, and that in general, neither social, political, security systems are less popular, nor does the population demand more punishment. Mr. Reumann, for example, comes to the result that the perception of punishment among the people is perceived as a mixture. And between 1970 and 2003, this perception has been quite stable and is even increasing during the last time. A neoliberal orientation among the population of Europe does not seem to be realized. Between 1977 and 2009, the part of those people assuming that poverty is caused by the poor people themselves is decreasing. The threat of crime and the fear of crime nowadays might not be automatically a metaphor of social insecurity. Surveys point out that social insecurity and social uncertainty and the balance questions are directly perceived as such and not being connected to crime prevention. Surveys as to worries and concerns, the social insecurity and social injustice have been on the top places for years. Threat of crime, but also concerns as to migration, despite the impression being spread with by the media, are on the last places, or they're not even mentioned anymore. So what remains? Independently of what your argumentation would be, the diagnosis of societies as crises, diagnosis assuming insecurity, get in trouble with empirics if crime and fear of crime are decreasing. Individualization, the risks of disintegration and insecurity make people face new challenges. But many people can deal with those challenges. And not everyone is equally affected. And I now get back to the beginning. We do have a society change and transformation happening here that is only partly reflected in politics and only partly reflected in differing or increasing fear of crime and fear of threat. Transformation that I would like to point out now refers to the changes of social connections of foreigners. Routine, everyday practice is the thing here. We have learned to deal with it. We expect crime, and we have an automatic prevention. We have this prevention mentality, and it's not necessarily fear anymore. So if I say the security society does make sense, and this term does make sense, I don't mean that security is the dominant point of reference for politics and that all threats are automatically understood as control issue. This aspect is crucial as a question, but it's just as crucial to understand how security mentalities develop and how they reflect in reality. To stay with the example of the beginning for my grandmother, it was totally normal not to lock her apartment. And we didn't have any automatic security systems in our cars either. But politics is also of central meaning here, because if you have the challenges of that the people are exposed to increasing in the course of individualization, there are many people not being able to tackle these challenges because they're not tolerant enough for the changes, because they don't have routine mechanisms for dealing with the insecurities, or because these insecurities reach an extent threatening social existence. This has got a lot to do with social security and social politics and social equality. If the expert's opinion as to this Prevention Day and the Munich Declaration states that the social state needs to be intensified, that's justified, but it can also be perceived totally unconnected with crime. The connection to crime and the threat of crime is quite risky. Social politics and social justice do not need the justification by crime prevention. Thank you very much.